We'll keep it with quarterback and transfer portal, though. Pete Nakos of On3 reporting that both Florida and Georgia, so here we go, not over with, have been in contact with the transfer quarterback. Buffalo quarterback C.J. Ogbonna has received interest from the Gators and the Bulldogs since entering the portal last week. According to his agent, Brian Miller, that he told On3, the Bulls starting quarterback threw for about 2,400 yards last year, 19 touchdowns this past season. Also rushed for 343 yards, 8 touchdowns. Former Southeast Missouri State transfer. He's thrown for about 4,000 career yards, 32 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. Ogbonna played 2 seasons at Hutchinson Community College from 2019 to 2020. So a lot of this comes in, while we go back that far, is because of the waivers that are out there, with the NCAA Division I Board of Directors approving a blanket waiver, granting an additional year of eligibility to former junior college transfers in light of the preliminary injunction against the NCAA and the Diego Pavia lawsuit. The Buffalo transfer is hoping to be granted a 7th season of eligibility. So he's got to get that before you can even have him as an option as a backup quarterback here at Florida. But talking to Florida and Georgia, so interesting that starting at Buffalo. I don't know why he'd go be a backup at Florida or Georgia. Seems like he could probably maybe go get a starting job somewhere, but maybe the money at these bigger schools mean more. So that's the only thing I can really think of, Will, when we talk about NIL, when we talk about transfer portal. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this till we find out more. But interesting that it's just another Florida-Georgia quarterback storyline here.
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of that is if you don't think you're going to have an NFL future, now's the time to grab funds that are going to be available, right? So yeah, you're a starter at Buffalo, but you become a backup at Florida, and now you've got multiple avenues to go become a GA and a coach as things progress, right? Quarterbacks tend to be the guys who go into the coaching profession most often, and so those backup quarterbacks, again, I think this is a place where, from an NFL perspective, when you think about building an organization, that's who you'd want. I'm actually more excited about Ogbonna than I was about Purdie.
For sure.
Similar QB rating, so 131.8, 7.1 yards per attempt, a little bit higher completion percentage, but also averaged 3.2 yards per rush, and was 4.2 his junior year, now 2.8 his senior year. But again, this is a guy who, when he goes back there, is going to be able to make some plays with his legs. Anytime you see a guy who doesn't have negative rushing yards, you're pretty sure that he's not a statue back there. So the other thing is, if you go look at like a guy like Mertz, he had a QB rating at Wisconsin of 127.7. So, and then went 159.1 at Florida. So Napier has clearly proven that when he takes a guy who's got experience in another program and has played pretty poorly, that he can get more out of him than maybe some other people would. So again, it's fire insurance, right? We're talking about who's going to be the backup DJ Lagway. But to your point, I think the two things that I would point to is, as a backup quarterback, if you're a backup quarterback in the SEC, then that means you're not an NFL prospect. And so if there's money attached to becoming a backup quarterback, it's worth it. And then everything's about network, man. And so, all of a sudden, if Billy Napier and Billy Napier's staff and Buffalo's head coach and Buffalo's staff, you've got more opportunities than if you were just at Buffalo independently. And, given the fact that what you say, he's going to be 7th year, should be 26 years old heading into this year. It's time to start thinking about your future, man. It's that old NCAA commercial. Like, not everybody goes professional in sports. They go professional in something. It's time to think about that. That's what's going on here.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Keep it going here. Transfer portal. So for now, we know with Purdie gone, the transfer portal for Florida as of now is edge Kofi Asari, wide receiver J. Michael Sturdivant, punter Tommy Doman. That makes up the portal class. So now we'll go to it with some news from the portal. Had some DB targets ahead or head elsewhere to Georgia and Miami, of course, through the transfer portal. Keyshawn Silver goes to USC. Not many options at offensive tackle, it looks like, overall at defensive tackle either. So we'll see what happens at those spots there. But Florida's still hosting players from the transfer portal and will be hosting players from the transfer portal. Was supposed to be a bigger this past weekend than it was, but some defensive backs on campus, but they couldn't make it due to snowstorms. So only Miami's Isaiah Thomas made it in this past weekend. So Florida is now in reschedule mode For Southern Miss cornerback Michael Carraway, we've seen, as I mentioned, you've lost guys to Miami, you lost guys to Georgia, with guys Florida looking for some versatile options, star, corner, safety. Definitely, you can see it just by who they've been targeting. They really see secondary as a huge need in the transfer portal.
As does anyone who watched the Florida defense in 2023 and 2024. I mean, look, DB. Clearly a place where Florida needs to emphasize. Their best defensive back from last year is Triquez Bridges. He's going to be gone. Jason Marshall, he's also gone. Devin Moore struggled to stay healthy. Castell didn't take the step forward. Thornton was sort of on and off this year. So you start looking at the guys who they brought in last year in the portal. Some of them panned out, some of them didn't. And yeah, that's the spot. I do think there's going to be a lot of criticism about the transfer portal and how aggressive Florida's been, and I think deservedly so in some respects. But the other thing is, when we got together last week, we had heard, but it had not been confirmed yet, that Tyreek Sapp was coming back, and that guy was by far the best player on Florida's defense. Whether you look at PFF, whether you look at sacks, whether you look at I don't care what stat you look at, that guy was wreaking havoc all over the place. And so keeping Banks and keeping Sapp probably gives you way more value than trying to bring in replacements for those guys.
Would you feel? Yeah, I've asked the fan or on the Discord. It's like, would you feel better if those guys that went to the NFL and you got transfer guys just to make you feel better about the transfer portal? No,
we'd be pointing to it. I mean, unless it's like Harold Perkins, no,
yeah,
right? I mean, it's one of those things where you're just like, oh, Walter Nolan, is he available? Okay, like, yeah. Yes. I mean, so Florida's done a very nice job of keeping their players together. Like you talked about offensive tackle. They're going to bring back 4 of their 5 offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. And so, continuity there, pretty strong. Wide receiver, obviously, there have been a lot of guys coming with the Wilson signing, and you got Ventrell Brown. Then you've got, Sturdivant coming in as well. So, again, you're starting to feel kind of good about that spot as well. The one place I just really have a lot of concern about is safety specifically, right? The explosive plays. Florida had to play a ton of cover 2 to protect the back end of their defense last year. And things didn't really start to improve until the defensive line started to take another step forward. Obviously, you lose Pyburn, but you keep these other 2 guys on the interior. You're going to need a couple of guys to step up, but then you're going to need some reinforcements back there. There's limited spots left for Florida, in fact. And so that's one of the things I think might end up being a silver lining here is if they can find a backup quarterback, if a guy like Clay Millen, or if Aiden Warner turns out, if they look at it and go, he can win us a game or 2, like he's better than what he showed on the field. Well, now if you've got another spot of defensive back, because I think I said it last week, stack. Like the first guy might not work out, but stack a bunch of guys to make sure that you've done it. Because Florida doesn't need to get that much better than they were the second half of the year on defense with Lagway at quarterback. And in fact, there were all those stats about Lagway in games that he actually started and finished what his record was. Some of that is that the defense was playing awesome by the time Lagway was starting. And so the combination of a guy who can make explosives and a defense that's playing the way Florida's defense was, is a pretty deadly combination, even with some of the limitations that the Gators have. So anything they can do to allow them to be more multiple, to get those guys, Sapp and Banks, more one-on-ones, right? To make the offensive line have to respect that Florida might bring a blitz because they can protect on the back end, even if they go single high safety, even if they end up with a safety and one-on-one coverage. Those are all the things that I think Florida's going to need to get better at. And so it's awesome to see that they're bringing in all these defensive backs. But obviously, just like with Purdie, you got to bring them in, you got to keep them, and they got to be on the field when 2025 starts.